Yo, what's good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Vitamin C's. As usual, I'm your boy Adam Taylor. Tim is back from his fight with COVID. He's looking like he's won the fight, just about. You're okay there, Tim?
I'm doing a lot better, to be honest. There's a few days I'm like on the tail end of it. I would say I'm at like 90%. I feel like the brain aspect's probably going to be there. So if I seem very slow to be thinking, it's because of COVID brain. I'm going to blame everything on fog brain, including any slip ups I have today.
Yeah, I was about to say that's your way out. And we're joined by a guest. I wanted to make sure Tim was okay before I introduced him. Everyone knows him. Bobby Manning. The guy is blowing up. Bobby, man, last time I spoke to you, you were doing your thing for it's been a while, right? It was on a different show. But you've just blown up since then. You broke some Celtics news over the summer a couple of times, had a few scoops a few times, and then just the other day you got some shit from Kevin Durant. So you're definitely blowing up a little bit, man. How does that feel?
Yeah, it was a cool week. Meeting Durant. I don't know if you saw the picture too. I met West Side Gun and Stove God Cooks at the Celtics game, two of my favorite rappers. So I met some cool people last week, and that's sort of the reason we all kind of get into this to some degree is to meet some of those people you grew up looking up to and or are a fan of right now. It was funny, like I'm around players all the time now, so that kind of you get used to that, but like seeing those guys who I like listen to all the time, I was like 10 times more excited to see them than, Durant or Tatum or Brown or any of these other guys I'm around sometimes.
And then what happened with Durant? So you just said, just asked him a question and he gave
they're pretty guarded there in Brooklyn for obvious reasons. So I didn't get to ask questions in the presser after the game. But I was walking out of the door. I was kind of pissed because I didn't get to ask my question. And so I'm holding the door behind me and Durant's coming behind me. And so, you walk toward the floor and the buses are like in between the press room and the floor. So he's heading over toward the bus, like right next to me. And so I just turned to him and introduced myself. And I said, I'm from Boston. And that's where I think he heard like the accent really come on. He said, you got a thick ass accent. And so I asked him for a quick quote about Tatum, and he actually said some stuff that I think makes a lot of sense in terms of like the Celtics really have a good team around him to complement what he does well now. They're bringing out the best out of him. And, he doesn't really see it as much as like Tatum's taking this huge leap individually as much as like the Celtics taking a big leap as a team here. And, that probably says something about where Durant's at too in terms of Brooklyn and where they're at as a team. I'm sure there's some of that, but I was interested to hear his perspective on it because obviously they worked out together over the summer and sort of helped each other prepare for this season. So it was good. He was cordial. It was after a tough loss, so normally players aren't as willing to talk after that. So I've always kind of respected Durant's openness and ability to go back and forth with people, and he was pretty good with me there.
And I feel like overall too, I think the way that Kevin Durant overall has handled the Brooklyn situation, considering all of the turmoil there, I think it could all things considered, it could have been a lot worse. I think like there's still a chance that he, asks out at some point in the future. Maybe he tries to go to Phoenix, and we're going to get into that obviously because the Celtics just absolutely obliterated them the other night. But considering everything that's going on with Kyrie Irving, the way the Nets handled that, the way they've handled roster building, I've seen superstars handle worse. That's all I'm saying. I think there have been other situations where superstars have just had full-blown meltdowns, and I don't think you could say the same thing for Kevin Durant. I think that's shown a lot of overall maturity with how his career has gone, and I think it's going to change the way that people look at him overall, like in the long run.
Well, he's having an incredible season. You look at these numbers, 30 a game, 7 rebounds, 5 assists. He's putting in work and defending at a high level. I think the Nets have been a much better defense. We're probably going to talk about the Celtics defensive turnaround at some point here, but last 15 games, Nets are top 8 defense, right above the Celtics, actually, number 6. So they've been great on that end. He's a big part of that. He's running their offense pretty much. Him and Kyrie have been doing their thing. So he went back there. It was obviously a frustrating summer. He's talked about it a little bit, why he demanded that trade with Yahoo. And he came back and he's doing his thing. And, that's something I think people have always respected about him too, is that like, he's just all about basketball. And I thought he veered away from that a little bit when he asked them to fire Nash and Marks. I really didn't like when he did that. I was obviously a guy who wanted him on the Celtics. But when he did that, I was like, I'm out. And the Celtics obviously made the right choice there, the way it's going for them so far.
So, Bobby, man, you're getting ready as we speak to hop on a flight, go out to the West Coast, catch some sun, avoid that Boston cold for a few days. But you've missed the blowout, right? So you missed the Celtics absolutely hand an ass whooping to the Phoenix Suns. First of all, before we even get into that game, do you kind of regret not flying out earlier to catch that one as well?
I'd love to go to every game. It's it's dollars and cents though. We got to pick our spots, but yeah, that would have been a cool one to see. Obviously, you want to see the finals rematch, so we'll be doing that. And then you see LeBron and Kawhi. Those would be some, I think, tougher matchups for the Celtics here. But I am stunned. I mean, the Suns were 1-point favorites going into that game. No Horford. You expect Phoenix to be able to keep it close, but the way the Celtics defend, this scheme that we've seen under Joe Mazzulla, like really brought the worst out of the Suns in terms of like trying to get them to miss mid-rangers and cutting off that rim access and really having Ayton out of sorts there. So this defensive resurgence we're seeing from the Celtics here over the last week or two is really exciting because I was worried about them on that end. Like the numbers weren't great. They had a couple games where they really got beat up bad on that end earlier in the year. Now they're starting to look more and more like themselves. And it's coming in line with Rob potentially returning here, which is what they always hoped was going to get them back to that level. But they're starting to do it without him. They did it without Horford against a really good team. And you're just starting to check off those boxes. Like who could beat the Celtics? Phoenix didn't look good. Denver, they fought, but the Celtics kind of handled them. Memphis, another tough battle, but Celtics handled them. You're just checking off all these teams that are kind of going to be there at the end with Boston. You're still waiting for Christmas because that's the big one. But they're passing so many tests, and they're passing them emphatically to go at 45. That was unbelievable. That was really one of the more shocking results I've ever seen covering the Celtics. Like that was not in my mind going into that game at all. The fact that it could be a blowout.
Go ahead, Tim.
I thought that DeAndre Ayton was gonna have a better game. Like it seemed like it was all lined up for that. There's no Rob, there's no Al. They started Blake Griffin. Blake Griffin did a lot better than I thought he would.
Yeah.
And there was just like an opportunity there for Ayton to just feast, and he really didn't.
He had a few looks early and he just kind of faded, turned the ball over. Yeah, he was awful.
I've watched the Suns a ton this season, like a fair amount. And one of the things they usually do offensively is they use Ayton as their hub, right? Similar to what Miami do with Bam. And the Celtics just did such a good job of kind of limiting the passing lanes or forcing Ayton away from that high post where he likes to operate. Because they like to do, like, it's a very similar system to what Miami do run with Bam in terms of getting your split cuts off of where you've got Ayton. So as Bobby kind of alluded to, like the Celtics defense did a really good job of shutting that down. And then once you remove Ayton's kind of involvement in that offensive system and you've taken them away from their primary kind of ABC sets and how they like to attack teams, they were just out of sorts because then it is that they kind of went to what we saw from the Celtics a year or two ago where, hey, you shut down what we wanted to do. So now we're going to have to try and beat you as an ISO team. And now we're going to have to try and just drive into the teeth and try and force something. And you could see they were playing erratically. And a lot of that came from not allowing Ayton to do his work around it because he's more like he's a high post and a corner guy. Taking him away from them areas just really pushed their offense into uncharted territory, man.
Yeah, and when I've talked to different guys on the Celtics, the first thing you hear is that Rob's got to come back, right? And that's going to solve a lot. Second thing you hear is it's going to come down to a lot of individual efforts on defense. Like guys got to step up in their one-on-one matchups. And this was a really good opportunity, like you said, Adam, once the Suns went into isolation. All right, Jaylen Brown, you got to guard Booker one-on-one. And when Brown can get that individual matchup, he's great. Like I think we've nitpicked his defense a lot over the years, and that's one area where he can be great. And he's been awesome the last 3 games on that end. Smart starting to get better there. I feel like he's starting to get healthier with some of these nights off that they're getting him, and just management. And I think other guys shined out in that game too individually, and now you're really starting to see them build momentum on that end, be a little more disruptive. I think they were last in forced turnovers for a decent amount of this year to start. So they're starting to look more and more like themselves on that end. And I think part of it is Brown, shaking off some of the occasional offensive struggles. I think those were getting in his head a little bit. He admitted that offense was impacting their defense. And, they're looking a lot more connected too. And they've got some new guys, right? Hauser, Brogdon, Cornette's playing for the first time with them full time, Griffin. So there's a few guys that they had to mix in there. And I'm sure they've turned up the intensity on that end too. So they're getting closer. Now, can they be number one again? That's probably where Rob comes in, and his impact's going to be key there. But if they're top 10, I think that's the formula. Number one offense and top 10 defense can probably win you a championship.
Yeah,
I've been saying this for ages. Sorry, Tim.
No, they're at 9th right now, right? I think they're at, I checked it earlier today. I think they're 9th in defensive rating right now. 1st in offense, 1st in net rating. And I mean, against the Suns, they had 14 total steals, which was like a big thing for them.
Yeah.
In terms of, that might be the highest they've had in a single game this year, which would make sense. I mean, total turnovers for the Suns was 18. So that's what you're trying to get them to do. And I think that's exactly what they ended up doing. Adam talked about it a little bit before, but the fact is they took away a lot of those passing lanes away from Ayton in the block. So I think that they're just finding ways to just kind of wriggle in there and disrupt other teams' offenses and force them out of their rhythm. And what that does is it just creates opportunities, and they're just jumping all over them.
They don't have that high energy guy either, right? Like if you look at so the Celtics, their high energy guy is Marcus, but then they added Derek White as a connector that can also do some of that stuff off, like just as a pest. And then so earlier today I was watching, who was I watching? I was watching the Mavericks, and they've got Josh Green, who's similar, right? It just comes in high energy, just a pest. You've got the Pelicans with Jose Alvarado. That's something that you don't have to worry about against Phoenix that much. Like, I don't see anyone. Crowder was obviously that guy for them, but his situations obviously is what it is. But that's taken so much away from their toughness and their ability to be a little bit more in your face. And that came when you're coming up against a team like the Celtics, where you've got 3 of those high energy dudes in Brogdon, Smart, and White. It's really difficult to try and contain them. And that's what I think is going to be a good point when we see them play Milwaukee on Christmas Day, because each one of those guys are going to take their turn trying to get under Drew Holiday and try and limit Drew Holiday, because that's what they do so well as a trio now.
Yeah, they all reinforce each other too. And you mentioned White. He's the one that I'm so intrigued by because his role changes every night. Yeah. If Smart's out, he's got to be on the ball, and he does quite a bit in that role. And those nights for Smart and Brogdon out, I'm sort of like, man, I wish I could get him the ball more, because he makes it happen in that role. The pick and roll, he's great at. He's got good chemistry with Tatum there. They have a little 2-man game that they get going when Smart's out or Brogdon's out, and he gets that chance. But then last night, I know he goes 1 of 4 from 3. But that 1-3 they set up to him in the corner, awesome play. I think Griffin had the back screen, hits it in the left corner, and he's been phenomenal as a shooter this year, which changes everything for his game. A lot of that's confidence, a lot of it's comfort, and you have these layers of guys that can attack you. So many guys can make a play. And I think the big thing, and you've talked about this, Adam, is that Jalen, he doesn't have to focus on playmaking as much because all those guys are out there. And Tatum even, he can play more off ball and screen and roll because there's so many creators. And that frees them up so much. The game's looking easy for those two. That's the biggest difference last year to this year, I think, is that last year Tatum's trying to play out all these doubles and traps and get off the ball, and he's turning the ball over and he's making mistakes or making bad reads. Now the pressure's not all on him. You got pretty much everybody on the floor can make a play, and all the different opposing coaches that they've faced have talked about that. It's that 5-out approach, 5 playmakers, 5 shooters. It's impossible to guard. It really is. There's just so much space you got to cover. Too many mismatches a lot of the times if you're not a defense that has guys 1 through 5 that can defend. And that's the other thing. The Celtics have that. Not many other teams do. So on the other side, they can dominate you defensively. And you're starting to think, I think their differential is plus 12 over the last 15 here. You got to start thinking this could be one of the all-time teams. The formula's there, the consistency's there, the great talent's there, and they're destroying teams night in and night out. And you're waiting for the shooting numbers to come back down to earth. They're not. You're waiting for the defense to land where it's going to land, and it looks like it's going up. And so, you're starting to think of them in that Warriors conversation, those Spurs teams with Kawhi, Duncan, and all the other, future Hall of Famers that were there. They're that kind of team, it looks like. And I look around the league, guys, who's going to beat them? Who's going to challenge them? It doesn't look like anyone's out there right now. Things can change, but they have it all. Everyone else is really struggling to keep up when they play them. And, barring injury, it looks like this team is just going to race to a championship the way it's going right now. It's a long way to go, but it's unbelievable what they've accomplished here.
My only concern with saying that like they're a historic team is the expectation that comes with that. So if you have this historic offense and this overall just absolute juggernaut team, then there's a lot more pressure on that unit as a whole to actually go out there and do the thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, from the way that they're talking in press conferences, they're keeping it level headed. They're taking it, game by game. They're like, yeah, this is great. That's awesome. We blow out the Suns. It means absolutely nothing if we don't win a championship.
Remember Joe after the Hornets game was like, I don't have good vibes.
Yeah, I'm not happy with this at all. Like, we won a game. Woo.
Yeah.
Like, so, I mean, I'm happy in the sense that they're keeping it grounded. But I would worry that with all the chatter and stuff that they don't let it get ahead of them. But I mean, so far it seems like that is not the case. So I'm hoping it stays that way. And in terms of the way that the Celtics have been trying to manage injuries, I think they've been doing a really good job. They're not rushing Rob back, in having Malcolm Brogdon in the backfold there now, where you've got that 3-guard tandem of him, White, and Smart. It allows you to just stagger those 3 guys and figure out their minutes. And
yeah, you only need 20 minutes from Brogdon. That's been the perfect formula for him.
And that's crazy that they can do that. Like, no other team any 3 of those guards are going to be like a starter level or starter capable level on any other team. Like, any other team would love to have any of those 3 guards as a starting point guard. And the Celtics have all 3 of them. And it's insane that they're able to go ahead and trot any of those guys out. And it's like the offense just doesn't skip a beat because they're all on the same page and the system is just operating so well. It's just so much better than I expected it to be.
Yeah.
I kind of want to push back on you saying that the pressure is going to be there if you're telling everyone they're an historic team, because you're playing in Boston, so the pressure's there anyway.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Last year they felt it, didn't they?
And then if you look at it like, hey, that season when you had Kyrie, you had Marcus Morris, Gordon Hayward, Al was there, you had Jason, you had Jalen. That was the pressure cooker season when you had all those names and then nothing worked, right? Everyone was out for their own like agendas. You had Rozier as well, who was really just into the bench role back then. When you look at the pressure they felt then, when they were supposed to be the team that took Golden State and finally knocked them off that perch and took over the East for the next 5 to 10 years, I think the pressure then was probably worse than what it is now, because the Celtics have had a few more conference finals runs. They've been to the NBA finals, and I feel like they're just better equipped to deal with that pressure. And I know that you said this earlier, Bobby, some of the stars are more guarded now. So when you look at Jason and Jalen, they are a little bit more protected by the team. They're more guarded in their savvier in how they deal with media themselves, right? They give answers, but non-answers. Unless it's Abby asking questions. Abby seems to get all the great ones. But when you look at it from a pressure standpoint, dude, I don't think this season's that bad compared to stuff that Jalen and Jason have been through in recent years.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of what you say there about their approach with the media. And, we love, we're fixated on that. We think it matters a lot. I don't know how much it does matter, but there's been a transformation there. I think Tatum's gotten a lot more poise in those spots. I notice him like picking out all these little performances, whether it's Blake's, whether it's Noah Vonleh's earlier in the year, like these different like individual efforts. He's really making a effort to call out and, give credit to, and I think manage some of the failures and some of the highs and lows of the season. Like he's really had a very vocal presence, I think, on this team. Even some of the goofier moments, like last night, you saw him calling out Grant for that second quarter celebration. I saw him most back tweeting about that. So like he's got a great poise atop this team. It feels like they're really embracing leadership. I saw Jalen to take responsibility for some of the turnovers he was going through. That's not something you heard from him in the past. And even compare it to last year at the beginning of the year when Ime was trying to sign captains, and none of them were really too interested in it. Like Smart said, we don't need captains, and Brown nominated Horford, and Tatum was like, yeah, I agree with Smart. We don't need captains. And now like they don't have that title, but they're embracing that role without there being a name attached to it. And Tatum, I think, more than anyone else has stepped into that. And I think like, how much is it leadership? How much is it talent in the system? I think you can probably like divvy up certain percentages there. But I don't think you can have a team where there's no voice at the top that everybody's following. And Tatum has just embraced that so much that they're all sort of following his lead. And even Horford, who I think was doing his best to fill that role last year through some of the tough times, has been thrilled to kind of hand that off to Tatum because, it's easier to lead if you're the best player on the team. Doing it from Horford's position where, he's a very important player on the roster, but sort of one of the role guys at this point in his career was a little tougher. So for Tatum to embrace that, I think has been huge for this group.
And Brown said as much too. Like Brown's talked about being a leader and, talking about being a leader in this locker room and, night in, night out, regardless of the opponent, like we need to come consistently in trying to play the right way. So it is good to see also that Jalen's going into that role. But I think overall the way that Jason Tatum has handled the press is a little bit different. Yeah. I don't know if it's just training because I know that these guys do go through that where it's like, hey, like this is how you handle these questions. And overall, you can see there's just a different poise in both of them. But specifically, as you said, with Jason Tatum, like the way that he's just overall handled situations in terms of the public when they've had losses, how they talk about wins, how he's talked about the MVP talk and chatter. He's, it's all well and good, but like we've got bigger fish to fry. We've got like the ultimate goal in mind is winning a championship. Like we want to get back to the finals and get over that hump. So just the way that he's handled that and those kind of comments, it just makes me feel a lot safer with him at the helm. And I think overall, like it's really easy to forget because of how much experience these guys have, how young they are. And they've got their best years of basketball ahead of them. And it's just so
That's what Adam was talking about, like the things that they've gone through so early in their career, like East Finals first 2 years, team breaking up, team trying to get back on their feet for a couple of years there. Going through those failures was the big one, right? I think that's where they really notice, like, all right, these bad habits we have, if we do these, we're going to have a first round exit in 2021. And then, they'd go back to those throughout 2022. And when they started doing them in the playoffs, you saw they almost blew the second round. They went down 3-2. They almost blew the East Finals. They lost, gave up that big lead in Game 7. And then they did blow the finals. That's another thing you keep hearing is like, man, we saw what we did there and we can't do it again. And those issues haven't popped up at all this year, which is unbelievable because those things are in their game. Like there's probably been like one night, maybe that Brooklyn game or another one where they're going a little too ISO heavy. They're not moving the ball. They're not doing all this off-ball stuff that they've emphasized. And you see the results. Like it's not good. And that's popped up so rarely this year. It's unbelievable because even 7 months ago in the finals, they were doing those things at times. And just to disastrous results. They've cut the turnovers out. They're taking better shots section. They really have this methodical approach to offense. And it's so consistent. They get out to big leads. They hold them. And they're just dominant and, so poised, so mature, like you talk about. And they're going to get better from here, like you say, Tim, because, your prime's usually from like 27 to 30. So super impressive to be able to hit this stride this early in their careers.
Brown said it as well, though, right? He was like, that finals loss humbled everybody on the roster. Like, it was one of those things where everybody kind of had to look at their game and look at their mistakes and kind of swallow it. So coming back this year and be with a bit more of a humble attitude, like, hey, we might be good individually, but we still got our butts whooped and we almost got bounced in 3 separate rounds, if you include the finals in that as the third round, where they did get bounced. There's a big difference in the way they're approaching things, and I think that mainly comes down to mindset. If you hear Tatum speak yesterday, this kind of leads us into the next part of the show, is like, we're taking it one game at a time. Everyone might feel like this Warriors game is kind of a revenge game or a measuring stick to see whether you've evolved enough that the Warriors are no longer a problem, which I don't believe anyway, because the Warriors are struggling their asses off right now. So even if you do beat them, what have you learned, really? But Tatum's whole mentality has just shifted, and I think that's the mentality of the whole team, is just it's tunnel vision at this point. It's championship or bust, and whenever they've said that in previous years, you've kind of felt like they didn't believe it when they were saying it, right? But now I feel like they're vindicated, it's in their voice. You can hear it.
Yeah, and to not have that voice at the top, we haven't even mentioned it. The way this year started, Ime getting suspended out of nowhere, days before camp, and Listen, I can't imagine how many people bet the under in terms of their win total just because of all that uncertainty. Rob surgery, Ime being out of there, Joe Mazzulla taking over, who no one really knew coming in. Save for the people that are around the team consistently, but not the experience you would have expected to be able to come in and lead with this level of poise and impactfulness. And I think he's done a great job. They've overcome a lot, and so much of that voice from last year that we've talked about Tatum and Brown taking on, that was in Ime's court last year. He was sort of the face of this team in terms of like what they were emphasizing, what they were saying publicly, what direction they were trying to point themselves in. So when they lost that, you wondered who was going to step into that void. And for the players to do it, that was very important, because regardless of what Joe was going to do, or Ime was going to do, frankly, no matter who the coach was, the players were going to have to step into that position eventually. And for them to be able to do it without Ime, it was really impressive.
I think Ime ended up like resetting the culture to an extent. Like there was definitely some weird vibes towards the end of like Brad's tenure, and a lot of people have talked about it, and I think I've heard your comments about it before, Bobby. Like I don't think Brad was getting fired. I think he wanted that front office role, and Danny was leaving. But I think overall, like he didn't have the same impact that he had on the locker room, and I think there needed to be some kind of reset. So when Ime came in, it was kind of like unlearning all of these bad habits, reestablishing these new ideals and like principles and the way we play. If we play the right, we play the right way and we play hard defense, we can always lean on our defense, and that's how we're going to win games. Ever since they've had that principle like instilled into them, it's been like a completely different feel around this team. So I think when Ime left, those principles, like the groundwork was still there. And at that point in time, it was Joe coming in there and just galvanizing a locker room that was overall like on the brink of like this could have make or break the season at that point. And that was before they even like played a single game. Like that could have seriously derailed any franchise, and it would have been completely understandable. But Joe went in there and just galvanized the locker room because those principles were like already instilled in them.
Credit to Joe though, he came in there and completely flipped their offensive playbook.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's completely different to what they were running last year, apart from the occasional like Ram section screen. Like I feel like he wanted to build on their defense. Like their defense seems very similar in terms of the structure and the way they switch, the way they they might go into up to touch. I know you were having a discussion with Cabangele about that before the season, playing up to touch.
Yeah,
but the offense itself, like Joe, like credit Joe as well for coming in and being like, right, it may reset the culture, and he gave us a defensive blueprint. But let me throw in my offensive blueprint too, because I feel like Joe just had a really good understanding of what the team had in terms of how like scorers and how to get the best out of them and what their spots were. And he's put everybody in a position to succeed, man. Everybody, whoever's getting minutes is finding ways to be beneficial to the rotation.
And that was necessary. And we didn't know what that was going to happen there, because I think he came into the position and was like, all right, we're not going to change a lot. We have a formula that works. But you're right, Adam. It's been transformative, the offensive system they're running here. And, he was pretty adamant about that coming in. I've had some conversations with people who said, like, Joe, he took the position and right away he's like, all right, we got to shake up some things the offense is doing here. And they spent the whole camp on offense. So if you're wondering why, like they might have gotten off to a little bit of a sluggish start defensively, that camp was all about offense, instituting these things, getting off to a hot start there. And their willingness to play with the pace that they need to in this system, to do all that screening and movement, which is something they didn't do 2 years ago. Even last year at times, it was a lot of standing around. And for it to just hit that quickly, that's still my biggest question, is like where that willingness to embrace that kind of play came from. And maybe it's Joe's messaging, maybe it's the trust that they have in him, but it's pretty drastically different from what we've seen the last couple of years here in terms of how active this offense is. And it's changed everything. Last year, that offense killed them. Like it dropped way off the map into the postseason. I know they were number one at the end of the year, but a lot of that was running off of stops and taking advantage of the disruptiveness defensively. Now in the half court, they're historic. And to be able to unlock that, like it obviously does speak to Joe's basketball mind, and a lot of the talk you've heard of, I guess I heard on the broadcast, the Suns were looking at bringing him in, the Jazz were looking to hire him as head coach and then assistant coach, and the Celtics were pretty guarded in keeping him and saw him as a guy who could step into that role eventually. Obviously, they weren't looking at having a head coach opening anytime soon, but things sort of aligned with Will Hardy leaving, Joe being there, Udoka getting suspended. And all of a sudden, I'm not ready to say this yet, but it's hard to argue against the fact that Joe's done a better job than Ime's did so far. And we'll see where that goes. There's going to be some bigger spots. There's going to be some challenges that he's going to have to face. I feel like things really haven't gone wrong yet to the degree where he's going to have to step in and do some difficult things. But, I've heard that he's been tough on the guys at times. Jalen and the turnovers. Damon Stoudemire has been a guy who's gotten on smart about some of the sloppy play at times. So they do get tough with them still. But there really hasn't been a need to step in and have some difficult conversations yet because it's all gone so well so far.
One interesting thing when you mentioned
you're never this bad with.
No, I'm never gonna jump in. I always assume that someone else is gonna say something. I don't know if you guys saw it today, but I thought it was interesting, and it made me think of it, Bobby, when you mentioned Monty Williams saying that he had contacted the Celtics, but it was back during the Brad Stevens era when he was starting to make his staff out. And the Celtics were like, no, you can't talk to him. And that's how much they value Joe, even way back when Brad was coaching still. Apparently before, and I'm sure you guys saw this circulating, doing rounds on Twitter, but apparently at one point, JJ Redick had a conversation with Joe Mazzulla. This was from the episode of the JJ Redick podcast with Derek White. Derek White was the guest on there, and apparently he talked about how this was right after everything happened with Ime. Joe went out on a golf course and played a couple hours of golf with JJ Redick, and apparently was talking to him about potentially coming on as like an assistant on the Celtics staff. And that was back before the season started. But apparently that's how he kind of got a read on Joe and the kind of guy he was, and apparently was just blown away with the way that he was talking about everything.
Man, could you imagine JJ Redick on this coaching staff? Like,
I don't even know what role he would be. Like, would he be a shooting coach?
Ben Sullivan's a shooting coach, and you've seen the benefits there with what he's done with Derek White. Mm-hmm. Like, what else does JJ Redick bring? Like, I'm not saying he wouldn't. Like, he's played on some really good teams, and he had a really long career, so he could definitely help. But we've seen, when Evan Turner came in that unofficial coach role, like, it lasted a year and then it kind of went away, and it was more of like a player liaison between the players and the coaching staff, because I felt like there was a bit of a disconnect there. So I'm just not sure what type of what would you be asking Redick to do?
Yeah, who knows what he did that for. I'm still curious about what's going to happen with that staff here, and I'm sure there was some uncertainty at the time of what's going to happen here, like who's going to stick on, who might end up somewhere else. And that question's still going to be there. It's still strange night in and night out seeing Joe with this group of Ime guys, Ben Sullivan, Ime friend from Portland, Damon Stoudemire, Ime friend from Portland, up and down that coaching staff. These were all Ime guys. Joe was the only guy from that Brad era. And you wonder how that's going to shift into this year. You almost got that awkward situation. It came so close, Ime coaching in Brooklyn. And you would have already had that first matchup between the two teams there. And obviously, Nets went in a different direction. Ime's still here, suspended. I don't know what's going to happen there. Seems like he'll never coach this team again. But where does that leave the assistants who weren't hired by Joe? Everything I've heard is they have a great relationship. But, you wonder what will happen there because, assistants come and go every year. And Joe will have to start filling those spots. And maybe that's a guy you looked at and was like, all right, if someone jumps ship right now, maybe JJ can fill in that spot and do some things for me here. But it will be interesting to see like how Joe kind of builds his staff over time here. I'm still surprised they haven't named him like the coach. That might be like some legal thing or, just kind of waiting and seeing what's going to happen with the Ime thing there. But he's the coach. I think he might win coach of the year just based off like the situation he was in. And, this will kind of become his world into the future. I'm excited to see him kind of build on it because you're already seeing him kind of go from like this real guarded figure stepping into this role without a lot of experience. And in the wake of all this like controversy, and now things are settling down and they're winning and he can kind of be himself a little bit. Like I love that little quip he had about the royal family at him when they stopped in. Like he's starting to be himself a little bit
hard, dude. Like I said this to you in a chat that we were in. I was like, dude, no one here cares about the Wolves. Look, I honestly think people out where you're at care more than what we actually
It
care
seems
about.
like it. People will line up on the streets waiting to see them. I was like, what is going on? And so I know some people who bought tickets to the game to see them. Forget the game. They were trying to see them. I don't understand
here,
it.
no one cares. Like, I'm not saying no one. There's a large contingent of people that do, but I've met one person actually in my entire 35 years on the planet. I've met one person that actually cared. Everyone else is like, nah, forget that, man.
And the player, yeah, it was so funny that the players were getting asked like they care. Like what?
Yeah.
Or the coach.
I don't know why they thought asking Jaylen Brown was like a good idea. It was like, of
I
course
know
he's gonna be
Jalen
like,
especially.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I mean, sorry. Like there's a whole lot of history I won't break into.
I didn't recognize the voice.
It was a 7 News report, a local TV. So it sort of became like more of like a local story too outside of sports. And I don't know. It was weird too. There were so many like reporters from Britain there for the game. They gave a ton of credentials for the game to people who were just there to cover the family, and we were upstairs. I was like, all right, I'll show up here for a day. It's fine.
You should have told them all, man. Like, yo, you should have bought Adam. I think that wraps us up. Though I know you're getting ready to go out to San Francisco to begin that trip. It's going to be warm. You said it was going to be wet. It's still going to be warmer.
Oh, rainy in San Fran, but LA should be nice.
Yeah, man. And then it's a big game, man. You get to see, as much as what Tatum said it was going to be just another game. It's still a big game because it is a measuring stick. Regardless of how the Warriors are playing right now, if they bring their A game, we're finally going to see like what Boston's new offense looks like going up against Warriors basketball that's been so dominant for the last 5-6 years.
Yeah, and hopefully the Warriors show up. It stinks Wiggins got hurt. He's probably not going to play. That's a guy who I think was the X factor in the finals, gave Tatum a lot of trouble, was great hub of offense for them off of Curry. So that changes everything immediately. And then I guess they sat Curry and Green against Utah. So hopefully they'll at least be good to go. But these aren't the same Warriors. It's been shocking to see 13-13. Defense a mess early, offense just looking for guys to contribute. These guys like Ty Jerome and Anthony Lamb are stepping in, and those guys weren't part of that team last year. It was Barry Payton who was a huge part of what they did looking back on it, and Otto Porter was pretty important too. It's a whole different game for them this year, and they're still one of those teams I expect to be there at the end when they figure everything out. But they obviously thought the younger guys were going to step in and do a better job there, and so. We've talked a little bit about like what can challenge the Celtics, like what's going to knock them off if they do fall short of a championship this year. And the one thing I'm looking at is that KD thing we opened the show talking about. Like if he moves this year, where would it be? Toronto, that changes a lot in Toronto. Phoenix, I think that brings Phoenix to a new level. Golden State, that was always kind of floating there. And I don't know if they have the pieces to do a deal, but if they were able to give up like everything, all their picks, all these young guys, I don't know if that's even enough. Maybe you got to throw Wiggins in there, and he sort of has that weird rule that you can't play with Simmons. So that's another thing the Nets would have to figure out at that point. But all of a sudden, you reunite Curry, Durant, those guys, Green. That'd be a team, I think, that could maybe stick with the Celtics. But, then you're kind of getting back together and trying to work with each other again and get that chemistry. So I'm looking at Durant. I hope he ends up on another team this year because I don't know where Brooklyn's going with Kyrie and Simmons and all that. And he's still at such a high level. You want to see him be there in the mix. And I don't know if he can do it with Brooklyn, but we'll see.
I've got no confidence that he can do it with Brooklyn. I also want to point out that the Warriors' issues right now are exactly what we saw Boston going through the last 2 years of age, where you've got your stars of now, the present, but you've also trying to build for the future. You got your
Neesmiths and your Romeos there.
And Cake and eat it
Pritchard.
too.
You just can't figure it out because it's too difficult. Because if you're not giving the minutes to the young guys to develop them, they're not going to hit their potential, so they won't be stars. And but you've already got Steph, Clay, Draymond, you should be trying to flip these young guys, as you said, into that fourth guy or that next big star. And if that's Durant, so be it. If it's someone a bit younger, so then you've at least got someone to kind of team up with Wiggins when Steph and Clay do start to kind of wind their careers down, then great too. But keeping all these young guys makes no sense. But I'm all for it if it means that Boston have one less team to worry about in the finals.
Yeah, and Clay, that's a big one. It's tough watching him right now. He's just not Clay anymore, and I don't know if he can get back there. He was okay in the finals last year. He had a few moments, but they sort of won in spite of him to some degree, and some of the ups and downs he had. That's what they really need to figure out, is how they can get him right or move on from him or whatever they potentially do. I don't think they can move on from him with the contract he's on, but they're going to have to make a move, I think. And they're still one of those teams you look at and say, like, they have enough of those intangibles, the toughness, the experience in those big spots to be able to obviously win the West. The West doesn't look that tough, but, maybe beat the Celtics when push comes to shove. I still think that's what we're going to see somehow or another, a Celtics-Warriors finals.
The NBA want that to happen. Most certainly the NBA want that rematch to happen.
What a great matchup that was. It was fun. But you got Curry, you got Tatum. That was like after a Bucks Suns one that was kind of awkward, weird markets. Giannis and Paul and all those guys are stars, but not quite Tatum and Curry. The NBA was loving that San Francisco Boston thing happening.
You want to speak to him? You're sitting there looking like
we talked about wrapping it up, and then we were talking
Warriors
rematch.
We'll wrap it up there. I mean, I don't know if you got packing to do, Bobby, or
yeah, a little bit of packing, a little bit of writing. Then I guess it's a 7-hour flight. I sleep pretty good on flights, so I'll stay up late and do all
Do you
that.
have a connecting flight?
No, straight through.
Damn.
Don't you think that's wild that I can get to Boston in the same time it takes you to get to LA?
Yeah, I mean, I guess is it similar distances? I'm not.
Yeah, it's almost
It usually takes a little bit less. Than
so
7
Boston
hours.
for me, Boston is basically the halfway point. So it's almost the exact same distance.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Which
and
is
then there's
wild.
those wind. It's tougher going out west than it is going west to east because of those winds and all that. So that's what makes it a little bit longer. And so I'll see if I can catch practice tomorrow. I think it's early. I don't think I'm going to make it, but we'll see. They'll be practicing tomorrow. I'm sure there'll be some stuff out of there. Rob is with the team, so we'll see if he practices. And I guess Woj was saying last night it'll be like 10 to 12 days. I was hearing there's a chance he might play on this trip. But if that's the case and it's 10 to 12 days, you're probably looking at like that Magic miniseries back home. Though if he's on the trip, you might see him practicing and see how he reacts. Joe's been saying, like, when he's ready, when he feels comfortable, that's when they might plug him in. So it could be any day now, it feels like.
Man, I'm excited to see Rob back. And the downside is, like, whenever you haven't seen a guy in a while, you want to see what they've improved on. And with Rob, it's not going to be that way because he hasn't had time to work on anything apart from, like, rehabbing. But just what he brings in general, the above the rim game, the weak side roamer, being able to contest guys. You'll see the Celtics gamble more. You know what I mean? They'll start taking a few more risks. Not like they don't take risks defensively now anyway. And I'm curious to see what happens with that big man rotation. I think we're going to see a big shift in how minutes are distributed among those bigs. And what happens? What do you stick with the Rob and Al? Or do you want to move Al to the bench now and then try and start building that Rob and Grant kind of partnership? Because that feels like that's going to be the big man pairing moving forwards, right? That kind of feels like it needs to start getting developed sooner or later.
I'd love to see Rob in that Cornet role because you think all the things Cornet is doing well right now, Rob's capable of doing that at an even higher level. And I wonder, is there any chance we see Rob try the Cornet contest? That's what.
No. Rob can close the distance too quickly. Cornet, that's what, like, I think Cornet does it, and I see the benefits.
What do you think of it, Taylor? You're kind of in the weeds of the game. Do you think it works?
You asking me or Tim?
You.
Me, I think it works a little bit. Yeah, I think it's a line of sight thing, right? So I'll go back to the bubble. Do you remember when all the players in the bubble were like, "Oh, it's going to take us a while because we don't have our reference points for our shots."
Yeah, the depth perception, yeah.
Yeah, and then, like, I think that when you've got someone like Cornet who's like 7'2" already, and then he's jumping, so then he's probably up to like 9 foot in the air. That it's so hard to kind of get your depth perception, get those reference points, keep that line of sight, and get the shot off. And you feel like you've got to shoot over that 9 feet, right? Even though obviously he's going to be coming back down. I think it makes a difference. I don't think it's as impactful as what the numbers say. I think we're going to see that start leveling out some point before the end of the season. But it's got to make a difference, man. Could you shoot over like a 7-foot guy jumping 2 more feet in the air?
That's what I'd like to, try. I don't know if I'd get the opportunity.
You gonna ask him for scientific purposes?
I don't know.
I want an ESPN Sports Science on it. You know when it is?
Actually, if we keep pushing this to like the forefront, it will happen.
That would be a good. They used to do great segments like that. Yeah, I don't even know if they do that anymore.
Yeah,
I think they do them, but it's a lot less frequently, and it's nowhere near as in depth as it used to be.
That would be the perfect candidate for that.
Hopefully they watch this video and then we can get some credit for it, man.
Yeah.
Right. Bobby, man, thank you for joining us, man. I really appreciate it. It's always fun when we get to chop it up.
Yeah, for sure. And look out for our post-game coverage out there. We'll be live after all the games as we usually are here on CLNS.
How many of you are going?
Just me. But all the other guys that will be in the studio. So check us out.
Peace.
Cheers.